Hi, everyone. Welcome to the History Respawn podcast. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. On today's episode, we'll be discussing recent news in history games, upcoming history game releases, and the non-history games that we've been playing recently. But before I get to all of that, I want to introduce my co-host on this episode, the best college esports coach in North America, Dr. John Harney. Hey, John.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for the intro. The entirely accurate intro. Yes.
So I wanted to spend a little time here up at the top of the episode saying hello to our new listeners. We got a new slew of subscribers over the last month to the podcast. And this is in the previous month, September, where we didn't actually put out a podcast. So it turns out the secret, John, to getting more listeners is to not put any content out. I had no idea. But to those of you who are new listeners to the show, welcome. I thought I'd spend a couple moments here at the beginning to talk a little bit about what we do and who we are. So John and I, we are professional historians, and we teach at universities in the United States. And we do History Respawn, this kind of hybrid digital YouTube / podcast / streaming show on the side, pro bono, without any grants or anything. But we do have a lot of fun looking at historical content in video games, and we've been doing it for almost 10 years now. So this is really making me feel old. But you're obviously aware, listener, of the podcast because you're listening to it. But we also have a YouTube channel, and we do occasionally stream from Twitch as well. But those Twitch streams we always archive onto YouTube anyways. And we do main shows where we consider historical games with guest scholars. We also do streams where it's just John and I talking about a particular game. And we've also in this year launched a new sub-series, limited series called Civs 101, which is looking at Civilization 6 and the leaders in Civilization 6 in order to kind of consider the Civilization series in the midst of its 30th anniversary. So yeah, I think that's the gist of it. John, is there anything else you wanted to add about this show and what we do?
I don't think so. Other than, you're being very modest, Bob. You created this is a media platform. I actually don't know whatever the synergistic title would be. We've been doing this since before it was cool.
That's exactly right. So if you are a new listener, thank you for joining us. If you are interested in our content and kind of getting a catalog of what we've done so far, I encourage you to go and visit our website, historyrespawn.com, which is hosted by Squarespace. And Squarespace has got some really great search capabilities, and it really helps if you're trying to find old stuff that we've done in the archives, almost 10 years worth of work. So yeah, go and check that out. We post all of our content on that website, and we haven't really done much writing on that website, but if you're looking for old stuff that we've done, then go there. And if you really like us, please consider supporting this show on Patreon. This podcast in particular wouldn't exist without support from History Respawn patrons. And so you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/History Respawn. And when you are going through the tiers of patrons, you can sign up at the base level and get emails from me, occasional emails from me about what we're doing and what we're planning. You can also get to the next tier where you're on our Discord server, which is occasionally lively. I wouldn't say it's all the time. And then there's additional tiers in which you get the ability to engage our guest scholars on the show with questions. And we had a recent Civs 101 episode focused on Queen Victoria in England, in which we had a HR patron ask a question, really good question, related to how the English are depicted in Civilization 6. And then Another kind of note about patrons, it was based on a recent discussion on our Discord server that I decided to do an upcoming episode of the show on Margaret Thatcher's tech base, which is a new Doom WOD. So this is a Doom mod that came out late last month, in which you get to go to hell and kill Margaret Thatcher. So I asked our patrons on Discord if this was a worthwhile game for the show, and the immediate response was yes. Make it happen. So later on this month, I'll be recording an episode of History Respawned about Thatcher's tech base and kind of considering not only this ludicrous Doom mod, but then also kind of considering Thatcher's legacy more generally, and what she means to modern British life, what she meant at the time of her leadership, but then also later on, and then what she means to current debates over Brexit. So those are just kind of some of the advantages you can get from supporting the show, in addition to our eternal thanks, of course, for helping us out. Okay, well, with that introduction out of the way, I was going to talk a little bit about some of the history games that we've been playing recently. And I'll start with you, John. John, you have been playing a new MMO from Amazon called New World. So take it away.
So I will, I'm going to just kind of soliloquy here for a couple of minutes. Which is you're going to add up to confusion. So this game confuses me is the first thing I'll say. And then Bob, you and I can talk about it. So for people who don't know, New World is the latest game from Amazon Game Studios, and Amazon have been trying to make Amazon gaming a thing for quite a while now. So I'm sure there are listeners who are Prime members who can avail of Prime Gaming, which is kind of a collection of goodies and free games and things like that. They update kind of on the month every couple of weeks. And they've been trying games as well, which to date have been very ill-fated and have either just been collapsed before they ever got, have been torn down before they ever got to release, or in the case of the team shooter Crucible, had a shockingly awful launch, sadly for the people who made it, where it was just terrible. It just completely failed on launch. So New World is a turn of the tide for them, and it seems to be a hit, at least moderately successful. And it's so it's interesting, depending how you want to look at it. The game is either kind of pirate themed or 13 Colonies frontiersman themed. And I think it's much more the latter, in the sense that what you do is you spend the game, certainly in the early stages, if you want to, you can fish and you can hunt, and you're running around kind of looking like a slightly video gamed up version of, settlers in the Americas, European settlers in the Americas in the 1600s, and 1500s and 1600s. And so that's an odd thing. And when and it's odd for a lot of reasons. And the game, so the opening cinematic in the game, and it's not a very story heavy game. I'll come back to that point in a minute. The opening cinematic for the game has a character. It kind of throws a fake at you. There's a character I thought at least was the player character, but is not. And he's wearing a full-on kind of conquistador style metal mask with the bearded face on it. Mm-hmm. And he meets with a priest, and they kind of have a discussion of mystical things in this new world, and they travel to the new world. And I'm all like, geez, this is not what I was expecting at all. And I had tried the game in the beta, and for a bunch of reasons quit on it incredibly early. And one of the reasons I quit on it early was I just didn't like any of this framing at all. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't, and not in the sense that I'd articulated any kind of specific anger against it. I just didn't like it, and it wouldn't be a time period I'm a big fan of anyway in general. But the game has since come out, and I was a little surprised at the lack of criticism it's kind of received in this regard. There was definitely an article in Polygon when it was in beta that talks about the issue of effectively it being a colonist fantasy. And although there are no indigenous people in the game, you are killing these these corrupted peoples that one could infer without making too big a leap are proxies for a kind of a local population to be removed
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. And it wasn't a bad article. I thought it was interesting, but it doesn't seem to have got a lot of traction. And even from people I follow on Twitter and stuff who usually care, I mean, an interesting comparison would be Ghosts of Tsushima. And when Ghosts of Tsushima came out, people were frustrated, and I think some people made the case that Ghost of Tsushima was an example of a bunch of white people making a kind of a Japan medieval tourism game, which I was what's the word I'm looking for? I was definitely open to that critique, but like not swayed enough to choose not to play it myself. And then there's another kind of contemporary argument that the game was fascist because it was promoting samurai, which I never found terribly convincing, and I thought historically was actually a bit of a mess of an argument. But these debates are healthy, I think, for games. And so I'm a little surprised at kind of the lack of an argument about New World. And
Hmm.
certainly if you were to play an hour of New World and not play much more, and there's nothing why, stopping you doing that, I think you come away with a little bit of a sense of shock, honestly, of like, geez, this is kind of wild, They kind of made this game where grab yourself a musket and go into the woods and hunt some animal and kill some people.
Hmm.
Um, Now, what I say is interesting about the game, and I have small kids, and there's other games I like to play, so I haven't. It's an MMO. It's quite time intensive. Um, as I've gotten further into the game, I've become less disconcerted by it myself as a player, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the game is extraordinarily tightly defined by its mechanics,
Mm.
and this is one of the things that I think has made it a bit of a it's kind of been getting like 7 out of 10 reviews, but it's kind of quietly selling lots of copies because, if you want to collect things and craft things and group up and attack and do PvP against other players, that's really all the game wants you to do.
Mm.
So, there's not that much story-based stuff. And, I mean, even in World of Warcraft and games like that, people just fly through that text anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm not to say there's no effort. There has been an effort put in, and I quite like a lot of the visual design stuff, but it's an extremely kind of mechanical game. And I think that has genuinely pushed it into this kind of abstracted area where the question of theme, I don't think it becomes removed, but it becomes diluted in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and then the other thing I'll say is if you want to talk about the game's theme, it's kind of an odd game in the sense that you have to pour a lot of time into it to qualify for the defining aspects of the game. But the game was the game was very clearly defined as designed as a PvP game. Like
Hmm.
that's what it was designed as. So if you were to extrapolate the theme of the game, um, you join one of three factions, and a faction can declare war on another faction to try and control territory for the purpose of controlling trade prices and things like that. And so what the game kind of wants these three factions to do is to constantly be at war with each other. So in effect, if you were going to quote unquote, role play yourself in this game, it's true that you could role play yourself as someone who goes out hunting bear on his own
Mm.
or her own for that matter. But the reality is the appropriate way to contextually role play within the universe the game is providing to you is to be a merciless psychopath. Like that's
Mm.
basically what happens. So I, I don't know if that was intended or not,
Like
but
all good games, right?
well, like all good games, right? And then also, if you're angered by, and I don't think it would be indefensible of any stretch of imagination. If you're angered by the existence of this game and you feel that the game is effectively, endorsing a kind of a colonist kind of view of the new world or whatever, it's like, well, good news because the game apparently thinks the colonists are all insane people, insane murderers.
Mm.
I mean, I just think that's kind of, that just is kind of fascinating to me. And then finally, just to wrap up, it's such an interesting game as well because so despite these themes of the new world and everything, it has what is now quickly becoming, or maybe has already become, standard practice or best practices in for character creation, things like that. So you don't pick a gender for your character; it just doesn't bother to give you the option. You pick a body type.
Mm.
And the body types kind of conform to, standard genders. But there's nothing stopping you picking what is kind of clearly the male body type, but dressing your character in dresses and vice versa and stuff. And just little things like that, like just removing all these little kind of unintentional blockages to various identity things and stuff.
Hmm.
Like that kind of stuff is in the game. And then I think a clever decision, and again, I think people are free to reject this as a solution, but the bad guys, the mobs that you are killing, the theory is that they also were stranded on this island as well, but unlike you, they got corrupted.
Mm.
And so the mobs are dressed in, and although they kind of have different colored skin, they're kind of corpses, but they're dressed in and they're coded as the same kind of ethnicity or the same background as the player characters.
Hmm.
And I think that does make a difference. I'm not trying to say that it solves those issues, or that it should for everybody, but that's an intriguing thing. So sorry, I kind of went on for a while there because it's I yeah. Like Bob knows, of course, I sent a whole bunch of text to Bob over the course of 2 days going, this game is confusing me. Like I don't know what to think about it. And in the end, I am doing a lot of fishing in the game, actually.
Hmm.
Kind of what's happening. So that's New World. I just fascinates me that it exists. Amazon Game Studios it must be a very interesting place. I don't know how the decisions are
Yeah.
being made, but it's a fascinating game.
So, is there a narrative conceit for why you're in this island and why people look like conquistadors, why it looks like the early modern period?
Not that I've encountered, and this could be an example of me just not getting far enough into the game.
Hmm.
But no, all you have to go on really is an opening cinematic, which you can find on YouTube right now. Which it's pretty, he meets a mysterious priest who says, "Let's go to the island." And that's kind of it.
Hmm.
It's not the first game to have that basic kind of an intro, but like the visual coding of it is very kind of the guy looks like a conquistador,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then on the way to the island, you are waylaid by a kind of some kind of a supernatural, bordering on Cthulhu-like kind of force.
Uh-huh.
And this force, it corrupts the people. So either there's two types of people who land on the beach: those who survive and are still human, that's player characters, and those who've been corrupted, they're mobs.
Mm.
That's the premise so far I have
Mm.
of the game. And I'm like level 16 or 17 in the game or something. So I
Yeah.
mean, you have to be level 25 just to compete in some of the early kind of
Oh, wow.
the dungeons and things like that. Yeah, it's
So it's a
odd that
true
way. Like,
true MMO then.
yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if that's some of the stuff that they bring down, but it's also it's a $40 game, and that's it. I mean, I'm sure they'll charge for
Interesting.
expansions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can give them, they will happily take your real money, if there's a certain hat you want. It's also got a very interesting, almost Eve style marketplace thing where there's no way to sell your stuff except to other players. So there
Mm.
is not an NPC who will buy your trash.
Hmm.
So you basically end up, at least I end up dismantling my trash. And then if something looks half decent, I throw it on to see if somebody wants to buy it.
Hmm.
It's intriguing, and you assume because Amazon is behind it, they'll stick with it for a long time, especially now they actually sold a few copies. And then with expansions, who knows? It could be like it could be like a Westworld, like the TV show type scenario, where like expansion two could be, could be anything, right? It could
Hmm.
be, a completely different visual language for all the player characters. I don't know.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I can't say that I'm terribly attracted by the sound of this game. I've never really been interested in MMOs in general, and this one doesn't sound that much different from what I've,
It's
experienced
it's
before.
it's honestly it feels like a stripped back, almost retro MMO, but like, well, I'll talk about Diablo 2 later as well. It kind of feels like it took a lot of the key things that are fun in some MMOs and just didn't bother with the rest of the stuff. So like for people who were really into World of Warcraft Classic, for example, this might be their next jam kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
It's a very stripped down game in that sense.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've got to say too, it is interesting to me. It does seem like this game is doing pretty well for Amazon. You see it
Hmm.
on charts and everything, and it seems to be it has a lot of big player base, and it does kind of remind me of the old MMO days where it's like there'd be a lot of discussion of single player games or multiplayer shooters in games journalism, games magazines, kind of just talk with your friends as well anecdotally, but then quietly these MMOs were like the biggest games in the world, like, and for
Right,
years and years
right.
and years that would be the case. And it's kind of a bit like in this past decade where very quietly games like League of Legends and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually Fortnite. It's like, oh, actually,
Mm-hmm.
these are the
Mm-hmm.
biggest games in the world. Like,
Yep.
these are
Yep.
generating huge amounts of revenue, and yet the discourse isn't really focused on it. And I've always wondered why that is. Why isn't there more of a discourse about these kinds of games? And I think it's because so many of them are not necessarily, I wouldn't say time wasters, but they're a game where you have to invest a lot into, and it's kind of almost like an idle game, in the
Yeah.
sense that you just kind of like, you get on and you play it for half an hour, and you do that every night. And
Mm-hmm.
I've never been attracted to that type of game, and I'm wondering what's wrong with me, to be honest, because these games do seem incredibly popular.
Well, you also don't have the time. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think that my theory is one of the reasons is that video game writers, their job, they can't. It doesn't. It's difficult for them to have a healthy life if they have to budget like 4 hours of Fortnite or 4 hours of Dota 2 or 4 hours of whatever the game is. I mean, some of them do that obviously, and now that you and I mean, are primarily teaching quote unquote traditional age college students, they do things like that. Like I have
Hmm.
a guy in the Overwatch team. His favorite game is actually Rainbow Six Siege, and he's still playing a bunch of Rainbow Six Siege on top of practicing for the Overwatch team. And I'm like, how does he do it? It's like, oh right, he's 19. He has time. Um, but also like Keith Stewart, who for a long time ran game section over at the Guardian newspaper and still contributes to that and everything. He's often talked about Fortnite online about for his son. It's like a hangout space.
Yeah.
And so his son just plays a lot of Fortnite. And like you say, Bob, like I have played Fortnite. It's just not for me, but quietly, like it's easily the biggest game on the planet,
Yeah.
like by a distance,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Well, speaking of Fortnite, I played some Fortnite recently, and in particular, I played the new mode called March Through Time, which is a historically based game mode for Fortnite, in which you play through Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington in late summer 1963. And this is an event. I think it might be a temporary event. I don't know how long it's going on, but it's an event that is put together by Epic Games and then Time Magazine. And so this is kind of a weird partnership, but the hope, at least according to the developers, is that this game mode in which you go through different sequences of the "I Have a Dream" speech, and you're walking around a recreation of the mall in Washington, D.C., where the speech took place. The idea, in the words of the developers, is, quote, teach kids about a vital era in American history via a platform they find familiar and engaging. So this is excellent corporate speak here from Epic Games. And so this is a game mode that came out on August 26th, near the anniversary of this speech. Of course, an incredibly historic moment in American history. This is, kind of one of these moments that I think, regardless of where you are in America, regardless of where you go to school, whether it's public or private, you will at some point have to sit through this speech and learn about its background. And I can't remember when it happened for me, but I would imagine it was probably third or fourth grade, something in there. And it's one of those historical events. I think it's interesting that it is so well known that it often doesn't really get brought up that much, I would say, in college surveys. I took U.S. history surveys in college myself. I was a teaching assistant for half a dozen American history surveys in graduate school. And then, of course, I've been teaching U.S. history surveys for the past decade as a professor. And in all that time, it's almost kind of one of these events that's taken as a granted. It's like, oh, everybody knows about the "I Have a Dream"
Hmm.
speech. And so I think, from the developer standpoint, it's an idea that I think has some merit. But I would almost say that it's an idea that maybe would go better with maybe a lesser known historical event, just because I feel like everybody does get this content in grade school in the States. And there's been some criticism of this mode, as you would probably expect, because player characters going into this mode can take on whatever character they want to be. So, you've got all sorts of images online in which, people are dressed up as superheroes and as, characters from Rick and Morty, and, just these outrageous Fortnite costumes. And they are walking around in this somber scene while Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice rings through the game world. And there are some kind of light interactive moments. So you can go to different sections of the mall in Washington and do some jump puzzles, do some light shooting puzzles in which you are opening up additional content related to the speech and then also the historical context around it. There are also kind of short little snippets and areas where they provide more historical detail, particularly related to the events in the civil rights movement in the run-up to the speech, particularly Birmingham protest, the Albany movement. There's a section on Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks. So there's a little bit of kind of understanding of what led to this speech and then why the speech was important. But I think a good deal of the criticism is warranted because of this kind of awkward, tonally dissonant setting for this historical game. I mean, it is attempting to provide players with a historical lesson, but it's doing it in a setting that I think is not built for that kind of lesson. And just to wrap things up on this, John, I don't know if you've gotten to play it, but I have been attempting to do a History Respawned episode on this game, and I have approached 4 different scholars to do this episode, and they have all turned me down. So I think that, it might be an indictment of History Respawned, but I think from the responses I've gotten so far, it's more of a criticism or a skepticism of Fortnite than of anything else.
Well, I was going to ask you, Bob, because I haven't played it, and I saw they kind of had this trailer slash video thing, and it just got mocked a lot online, and I think that it got a kind of mockery in the same way that I forget which Kardashian sister solved racism by sharing her Pepsi back in the summer that George Floyd was murdered. People remember that,
Yeah.
And the Fortnite video kind of got that same kind of reaction. But even now, as you were talking about it, there's more to it. I mean, I guess you've already kind of expressed your feelings about it, but like, just playing it, because that's the bet, right? Is it the interactive thing, and people who play Fortnite, that's what they're kind of betting on. I mean, is it an improvement? Is it working to any extent, or is it really just kind of struggling the whole time?
Yeah. So does playing it redeem it at all?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And
yeah.
I would say no. I would say that the experience of playing it, the interactive elements are so light that it's almost like you are walking around the mall, a recreation of the mall in Washington, while a YouTube video of the speech is playing. That's what it's like. Now, the interactive elements, they do, add to the story. They do provide some context, but it's a bit like the historical context that you would find in a AAA game like Assassin's Creed, one of the original Assassin's Creed. It's kind of historical context that you have to go and find, rather than having to play through it in order to advance the speech or advance the story. So now there are limitations on what the player character can do in this mode. So for instance, there's all sorts of emotes that are limited, player actions that are limited. But at the same time, you have people just kind of running around and jumping, goofing off, and which is fine because, it's Fortnite. But, I think with the intention of this game, and how important this moment is for American history, for how important it is for Black culture in particular, it can feel disrespectful, I think, and I can't say this as a Black person, but I just looking at it from the outside, it does seem like, it's like, I think it misses the mark in the attempt of doing something useful, in an attempt of doing something compelling. It ends up feeling a bit like a pastiche of something more significant.
Yeah, my personal feeling on it, and I haven't played it, so I'd confess to that, is that it's a bit frustrating that some people, I guess, would see this as an indictment that video games cannot do these things. I think it's more an indictment of a kind of a half-assed approach, honestly, in the sense that I think they kind of felt, well, we've done Drake concerts, we've done Ariana Grande concerts, let's do that. And I think with the best of intentions, but like I don't think it works. Whereas, I'm sure your kids watch similar things, Bob. Like my 7-year-old, remember last year, of course, he was at home doing school a lot, and one of the videos that they had him watch was a pretty entertaining video where all these different children, but one of them was like a child version of Jackie Robinson, and this was around Jackie Robinson Day in the Major League Baseball season, and it was just it was like any other cartoon, and my kids were really into it, and they learned who Jackie Robinson was in a way that was very kind of parallel or congruent with the other stuff they watch, like it wasn't an awkward, I remember these videos as a young person where it's like, oh my God, you're rolling your eyes, especially as a teenager, because it's so obvious or whatever. So like it can be done. And the Fortnite game mode, didn't do it. It seems. So Bob, I'm going to try something. I'm an amateur, saying I'm going to try a segue. Right?
Okay.
Are you ready for
I'm ready.
this?
I'm holding on to the edge of my seat.
And you're the best person to ask this. How would you compare? You mentioned Assassin's Creed a minute ago, but how would you directly compare the March Through Time Fortnite mode to, for example, a Discovery Tour mode in an Assassin's Creed game?
Well, I'm glad you asked, John, because we are about to see the release of a new Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour mode called Discovery Tour Viking Age. And that is coming out, I think, next Tuesday, October 19th. I think that's the date. Yeah, October 19th is definitely right. I don't know what day of the week it is. But Discovery Tour Viking Age. This is the Discovery Tour mode focused on the Vikings, focused on the so-called Dark Ages, and related to and attached to the base version of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So if you are listening to this and you own a copy Valhalla, whether that is on PC, Xbox, PS5, whatever, PS4, you will receive a copy of Discovery Tour for free. And then if you don't have the game, but you are interested in kind of their historically themed version of Valhalla, then I think at some point this year you can pay $20 to get access to this. And this mode, and kind of the predecessors to this, we've had a Discovery Tour mode for Ancient Egypt, and then also one for Ancient Greece prior to this. This mode, I think, takes a much more serious look at history and historical context. And it is a mode that I think is pretty incredible in the sense that I can't imagine Ubisoft makes that much money off of this mode. I could be wrong, but I can't imagine they make that much money off this. And it is something that is really pitched to educators to use in the classroom. And so, whereas I feel like MLK's March Through Time and Fortnite is a bit like an attempt by Epic Games to say, hey, look how socially conscious we are, look at how, friendly we are to these social causes, these social movements. Discovery Tour mode, there's nobody, I feel like, really cajoling Ubisoft to make this game. And I don't know how much of a demand there is for this game. And yet, in this upcoming mode, Viking Age, they really look like they've doubled down on the work with scholars and historians and linguists and archaeologists to try to provide players of Discovery Tour mode with a better sense of the world of the so-called Viking Age. This age in the ninth and 10th centuries, and yeah, and so it's fascinating to me. I remember when the first Discovery Tour came out several years ago now, and thinking, oh, that was a fun attempt, and I'm sure we'll never see another one. And then Discovery Tour Ancient Greece came out, and I was like, oh, it's interesting it did this again, but I'm sure we'll never see another one. And now here we are, and we've got a third Discovery Tour mode coming out next week, and it's just remarkable to me. I don't know. I don't know how it's doing for them, but I do appreciate the effort.
No, it's amazing, and it's kind of one of these things where you could argue, oh well, they're doing it for that kind of PR type thing. But like, with all due respect to ourselves, I mean, is the PR really that valuable? I mean, maybe it is. Maybe there's a sense that they can see this coming, that there's going to be that schools will start to adopt these things more. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, there could be some attempts there to do some game washing, given Ubisoft's recent problems with, their recent problems we talked about on this podcast related to sexual harassment, sexual assault in some circumstances as well. And recent turnover at their home base, but does this kind of educational mode, does this edutainment mode, really do that work for them? I don't really know, and what kind of business is it doing for them? And so, just briefly, just kind of preview this a bit more. Discovery Tour mode, prior to this point. And we've done episodes on this mode for the Ancient Egypt one, and then also the Ancient Greece version. In both these modes, those earlier versions of Discovery Tour felt very much like a museum exhibit. In other words, you would go up to different markers in the game world, and you would click on a thing, and then a narration would play, and you would get some separate images, or maybe some actions by NPCs in the game. But in this new Discovery Tour mode that's coming out next week, it has got a narrative element to it. So you follow the story of characters set within the world of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but they aren't running around stabbing people and murdering and stealing stuff, right? They are focusing instead on the stories of various individuals in this era of history. There is a merchant family. There is English monk. I guess I should say Anglo-Saxon monk. And then King Alfred. And so in each of these instances, you get the opportunity to follow along their story and see what their daily life is like. So in this mode, they've really done a lot of extra work from what we've seen with the preview coverage. They've really done a lot of extra work in trying to make this mode more interactive and kind of leaning into the gameplay elements of an Assassin's Creed game rather than just make it like a museum exhibit.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. And you've interviewed Maxime Durand before, Bob, and talked to him, and we know we had talked to Andrew Bird and Brenna Reinhardt Bird a few years ago for Far Cry Primal, and so they've done interesting things. Like with Far Cry Primal, they were like, let's hire these academics to help us make a plausible language they might have spoken. It's like they did not need to do that. So there's these kind of intriguing ideas, and it's you're completely right, Bob, to mention to use the euphemism, problems Ubisoft has right now, or the very serious working culture considerations that we're all aware of and can be Googled very quickly. It's a real pity, actually, because those commitments that are there, I would ordinarily, in isolation, I would consider hopeful signs of an interesting work culture, a positive work culture. It just goes to show how complex those dynamics can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would point out to the listeners as well, I've been trying to find out, and I can't find out, if the Ubisoft Plus subscription service will include the Discovery Tour on the 19th, but it does have the previous two Discovery Tours. And in the United States, at least, Ubisoft Plus is $15 a month, and you can use it with Amazon Luna or Google Stadia. They have all these different things, but that would be, for the price of $15, you could, as long as you can do it inside a month, you could road test such a mode or
Mm-hmm.
use it to your heart's content.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Valhalla version on Plus is their Ultimate Edition.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect they will make the Discovery Tour
Yes.
available
Yes. And
on the same day.
as far as I know, Discovery Tour comes
Okay.
even if you just own the base version of the game. So
Oh, awesome. Okay,
you don't
cool.
even have to have the what do you call it? Gold Edition DLC, all of that stuff. It just comes with it.
That's great.
So yeah, it's interesting, and I'm really really curious what kind of business that does for them, or what kind of rationale they have for this. I mean, I don't know. I just think it's such
Mm,
a fascinating project, but I will say, not putting aside all of the
mm,
issues with Ubisoft in general, I do appreciate that this mode exists and that they're trying it. But as long as those issues still exist with Ubisoft in general, we're just going to keep talking about them
hmm
on the show. And I can definitely say, as we've talked about in previous podcasts related to Ubisoft games and Assassin's Creed in particular, you know, I feel like I've had to do a lot of soul searching, continuing to talk about Ubisoft products. Maybe less so with Discovery Tour, but definitely with other games, other Ubisoft projects. I feel like I don't really want to. I really want to, focus on them or try to give them space, because I just feel like, it's in some way contributing to that, the maintenance of that culture that has been so destructive recently. So, yeah, it's, yeah.
It's really hard. I mean, it's something, a student reached out to me at the start of the autumn and asked me if we were going to continue playing Overwatch, because, of course, it's a Blizzard game, and Blizzard
Hmm.
are being
Yeah.
sued by the
Yeah.
state of California and now the US government. And and I said we were going to continue, but it's something, and frankly, this is a failing on my part. We haven't done it yet. Just for us to get together as a group and say, can we just say it out loud? That this is a thing this company
Hmm.
has been accused of doing, credibly accused of doing, and it's something I'd like us to be thinking about. Now, I'm happy to say that the captain of Overwatch, our entire Overwatch team, are a conscientious group of people. So, I think they would actually like to do that. But yeah, these are. It would feel odd not to mention it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You start that, and that's the whole problem, right? Is like this, and until those issues get resolved, it is what it is.
Yeah. So we
It's
have
hard.
we have a Discovery Tour mode, Viking Age, coming out October 19th. Then later on this month, in upcoming history game releases, we have Age of Empires 4, which will be coming out on October 28th. And this is a game I'm sure we'll cover at some point in November or December. But this game is kind of setting itself up to be essentially a remake of Age of Empires 2, which I would guess is probably the most popular of these real-time strategy games. And so that game is set in the medieval world, with, I think, some gameplay elements that might take it further afield than just medieval Europe. And so that's a game I can't say that I'm really looking forward to. I feel like real-time strategy games are a difficult sale, especially now, 20 years after Age of Empires 2 came out. But, it is a history game, and it's one that a lot of people really find compelling. And I think,
Hmm
when you think about a lot of the scholarship on history games and their depiction of the Middle Ages, Age of Empires 2 is a kind of a touchstone game in that regard. So I think we'll probably have a look at this. I don't know. Do you feel exhausted by RTS games, John? I don't want to speak for both of us here.
I mean, a little bit. I think I was on friends of the show, Brian and Corey.
Mm.
Hey guys, their podcast Starting Point. I was on there a few weeks ago, and they wanted to talk about Age of Empires 4. We had a really fun chat talking about it, and I think Rock Paper Shotgun, the venerable British PC gaming website, calls this game Age of Empires 2 2, which I think is pretty good. Which is pretty. Everyone's like, we've thrown Age of Empires 3 into the memory hole. Um, Part of me wonders the extent to which, the analogy I use of those guys was talking about, you know, there probably is an audience for this kind of game. That audience has a disposable income because they played this game a lot when they were like 16,
Yeah.
and now they're 45. Like I'm talking about myself here, and if you can tap into enough of those people, it's their Fortnite almost. Like that's entirely possible that could happen, or
Hmm.
something similar to that could happen. And I just wonder, what does a game like that need? Like, does it need to sell a certain amount of copies to people who will buy it, play 5 hours, and not play it anymore? But because it has 5,000 people on the servers 2 years later, it was a success. I don't know. I just don't know what
Yeah.
the business model for that game actually is.
Yeah. I don't either.
You know,
Yeah. It looks good, but
it does. Yeah.
yeah, again, like, yeah, what is the success there? What does success look like for them? Maybe, that's for billionaires to worry about, but still, it is
It's
kind of it's a weird thing.
yeah.
And you and I, having grown up with that series, you and I are
Hmm.
the best market for it.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here being like, yeah, I don't, I'm not sure. Unsure.
Maybe if we'd had kids earlier and they were in college, we'd be buying it, but because we could spend 10 hours a day on it or something. What Brian had pointed out to me on Starting Point was he had apparently played some of the beta, and he unlocked trebuchets, and the entire game stopped to show him effectively like a YouTube, like an old Encarta CD-ROM cyclopedia version of like, here's what a trebuchet is. And
Okay. Okay.
which I was like, okay. And it does kind of fit that game's kind of quasi grognard, George Costanza, I'll be a history buff type approach to history. And I think that's kind of what the game is doing. And some people like that, some people who can tell you what the sizes of the armies were in of all the major battles of the Punic Wars. This is
Hmm.
kind of the game for those people.
Hmm.
And I say that with love. I'm not making fun of anybody here. It's one way to look at histories, and it's different from Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour, and it's different from, I'm going to try it again, a Call of Duty game, for example, or one of those World War II shooters.
Well, speaking of Call of Duty and World War II, in the lengthy time it took us to come out with a new podcast, we had a new Call of Duty game announced, which will be coming out on November 5th, worldwide release, and it is called Call of Duty Vanguard. And this is being developed by Sledgehammer Games, and it is set in World War II. And in fact, it says that it's set near the end of the Second World War, and it's going to follow the story of special forces fighting in different theaters at the end of the Second World War, including in the Pacific, Western and Eastern Europe, and then in North Africa. And this is a game developed by Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer was the developers of 2017's Call of Duty WW2, which I don't know if you know this, John, but was the most popular game in 2017 in terms of total sales. So a history game.
Is it really?
Number one on the charts.
Huh.
Yeah. And so World War II still very popular as a setting for historical games. Very popular with the Call of Duty audience in particular. And we don't know that much about the story so far, but we do know that it is kind of going for this small special forces team, character-driven, diverse cast. We've got soldiers who are a female Soviet sniper. We've got a British paratrooper. We've got he's a Cameroonian British paratrooper. And then a Soviet sniper. I already said that. Sorry, I'm just keep reading over the same text over again, thinking it's new. So it does seem to be kind of building off of Call of Duty World War II in 2017, in the sense that it is featuring the same development team, Sledgehammer, but it is kind of diversifying the cast and I think the focus because Call of Duty World War II was really just a traditional retelling of American troops, American troop platoon on the Western Front during the Second World War, 1944 in particular. So, we'll see. I mean, Call of Duty, it really hasn't changed in the past 20 years. It's still, practicing the holy art of left trigger, right trigger, and, press A to pay respects and whatnot. So, I can't say that I'm really eager to play this game, but of course, as somebody who studies modern European history, somebody who is interested in historical games, I feel I'm duty bound to play this game at some point.
It feels to me a bit like Age of Empires 4 again, where the video game market is just so enormous now. You can have these very large constituencies of game players that I just don't enter into those constituencies ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like Call of Duty games are just not my thing, and Modern Warfare games, they're just not my thing. And I guess maybe I should at least play them to have a sense of where game kind of culture is or whatever. But it's just interesting to me. The people out there playing Call of Duty who don't play anything else. The people who play NBA 2K don't play anything else.
Yeah.
People who hopefully for the Age of Empires, people play Age of Empires 4 and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
These are kind of it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. So that does it with history games we've been playing. That does it for upcoming history game releases. So John, I'm wondering, what else have you been doing besides playing history games? What other games have you been playing? Books you've been reading? Anything you think it might interest the History Respawned audience?
Lots of stuff. Well, I'm playing Diablo 2 Resurrected, which I decided to get on my PlayStation, and so has the dual kind of thrill of playing a Diablo game on a console, which I'd never done before, which, as reported by others, works really well, surprisingly so. I just assume these games involve damaging your mouse over time by consistently clicking.
Or carpal tunnel syndrome, yeah.
Right, exactly. But it actually works very well on console. And I didn't have the teenage experience of Diablo 2, even though I'm the right age to have the experience. I didn't really have that experience. I'm pretty sure, Bob, I still have your CD copies of the game here in my house in Kentucky.
No kidding.
I think I do, yeah. So if you're wondering where that is, I think that's... So I had so I got the nostalgia thing a little bit, but I also got a kind of a weird discovering it now kind of mode. You're definitely playing Blizzard tax. I don't know that $40 is, that's maybe a little bit steep, but it's really good. And what's really impressive about it is that the graphics are demonstrably better, obviously. The audio is wonderful and the music is really good. And I remember when Diablo 3 came out and some people were very, very, very frustrated with the look of that game and the feel of the game. And playing this resurrected version, Diablo 2, you can really kind of get a sense of just how completely different the games are tonally and everything else. And to the point, honestly, where I was like, well, how, because a lot of the basic mechanics are the same. Your player walks the same way, the inventory is the same size. There's all these things they chose not to change. So to the point where I was like, how much do they really do? And then this is my favorite part of the game. And we're getting old now, so we're now living through the museumification of our childhoods, which is really weird. But you press a button on the PlayStation, I think it's holding down the kind of what I think of as the map button, the large button, and I think left trigger simultaneously. On a computer, it's the letter G on your keyboard, and it switches immediately at any point, no matter what you're doing. It switches from the modern graphics to the original graphics. And that gimmick is so good. It works so well. It's so cool. And although the graphics of the original game are great, it's kind of funny how I had lulled myself into how much they really do, and then you switch the graphics, and it's like, oh my god! It's the original game was 1994, I think, or something like that, or 96 maybe.
Yes, Diablo 1 was 96, I believe.
And Diablo 1 was 96. Yeah.
No. Diablo 1, I think, was 94, and Diablo 2, I want to say, was 2000. Let me look this up.
Yeah, no, yeah.
You keep talking.
Now we've done it to ourselves. So just to say that, And the Warcraft 3 kind of, when they did this Warcraft 3, they really, frankly, they screwed the pooch, sadly, and just did a lot of frustrating things that annoyed people. And this is before their very recent troubles. But Diablo 2, I think the resurrected version is I think it does justice to those original games. It's a great way to it's the only way that a sane person, well, that's not fair, but it's the most obvious and easiest way to get into the game in 2021. And there's a game to get into there. And my favorite thing about it actually, because it is a very I hope you like the idea of farming this level for hours,
Hmm.
because that's the game it is. They did not change that part. But the music and kind of because the music is a huge part of this, the their success in crafting a specific atmosphere,
Hmm.
um, it just worked. They just did it,
Yeah.
and so it's very very enjoyable, and worth keeping an eye out for people who think they might be intrigued. Maybe even wait for a Christmas sale if you want or something like that. But yeah, I'm really glad I got it.
Yeah.
I kind of had that classic buyer's remorse of like, oh John, you've got to stop buying video games, but actually it's good.
Yeah. So Diablo 1, 1997, and Diablo
Oh
2
wow,
was 2000. And
later than I thought.
dear listener, I almost failed out of college because of playing too much Diablo 2 back in the day. So yeah, I'm interested in getting this game, but I'm also terrified of getting this game because well, I kind of feel yuck about giving Activision Blizzard money, but also
Yeah.
I'm incredibly worried that this will suck up my life like it did 20 years ago. So I
The
have
word
to
is the word is relapse.
relapse. Yeah.
This is kinda, and the other game, I'm skipping order a tiny bit here because I know you've played a bunch of it as well, Bob, and you can speak about it more. The other game I've played is also kind of although more recent retread, is Back for Blood, which is
Mm.
kind of, would you call it a spiritual sequel to Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2, I guess, or
I mean, it's the same development team. I would almost say it's a
yeah,
direct sequel, even though it's
yeah.
not published by Valve.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't played as much of it as I would like to, but it's great. It's really good. I mean, Bob, you were a big. I kind of played the Left 4 Dead with bots and just kind of I didn't like playing with other people then, but you actually played the game the way it was meant to be. So, like, what do you think of Back 4 Blood as a kind of a Left 4 Dead veteran?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Left 4 Dead is uh, 4VE game. You know, a co-op four against enemy computer players or a team of four enemy zombie.
Director.
Yeah, director.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a game that I think originally first game came out in 2008, and then the second game came out in 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. And my lord, I mean, I think it was a game that if Diablo 2 almost failed me out of undergrad, then Left 4 Dead almost failed me out of graduate school. And it's just a game that I really enjoyed playing. I love the cooperative aspect of it. I don't really like competitive shooters. If you want to get a sense of my abilities in a competitive shooter, you should go and see a History Respawn episode I did with Chris Kempshaw for the World War One competitive shooter. I think it was Tannenberg that we played, but Chris must have killed me like 60 times during the course of that episode, mercilessly just destroying me. So I don't like competitive shooters, but I do like these cooperative shooters. And Back for Blood, in which you are playing as one of four survivors in a zombie apocalypse and making your way through these well-designed levels to escape. Just a thrilling experience, working with teammates to try to get out of it, basing your success on how many people survive, what kind of state they're in at the end. And then also in multiplayer, knowing that you're facing off against not just the computer director, but against other player characters, enemy player characters, is really thrilling. And I'm so glad this game is out. I'm so glad that they made a new update to the Left 4 Dead series, I guess you could say, or Left 4 Dead like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this game so far has exceeded all my expectations. It has got the the same sort of Left 4 Dead DNA in terms of the adrenaline's pumping and you've got the cooperative aspects, but it also looks fantastic. I've been playing on PC and I just think the graphics are phenomenal, and I think the control of your player character, it feels good. It feels much better than the old Left 4 Dead control, which felt a little bit stick-like. The old Left 4 Dead games were made with the Source engine, which was incredible, of course, back in 2008, but now is really, I think, showing its age in a lot of different ways, especially with regards to player movement and physics, and whatever engine they're using for this one is really, it's done a nice job. And I played 3 hours last night. I played through a campaign with a couple of other historians, friends of the show, and I can't wait to get back in and play more tonight.
And for people who never played the originals or aren't familiar with the game, I mean, so the idea is you're going through these different kind of maps with these various zombies all over the place, and there's lots of the devil's in the details, in the sense that you can provoke a swarm by accident, which is a bad time. And then there are specials, so there's different types of like zombies that stick out that are harder to kill or are more aggressive towards you, or there's a zombie that kind of clings himself to walls like Spider-Man and spits at you from a distance. There's the big kind of portentous one that it spits at you, and if you get close enough, he'll just explode and cover you all in goop and all this kind of stuff. And then the modern Back 4 Blood has added deck building, which I know sounds like the most almost like satire at this point, that every game has to have deck building in it, but it works and it's great. It's really good. It's these series of buffs that you can kind of choose to try and give yourself. And then the gunplay, like Bob mentioned a minute ago, or alluded to, I mean, at first I actually didn't kind of like it, and then I actually it clicked with me what they were doing with the guns, and that game feels great, feels very tactile.
Yes.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah. I love that game. Can't wait to play it. And I think John has added me as a friend on Xbox
make it
Live.
happen.
So we're going to try to make it happen. I don't think we'll do a History Respawn episode out of it, but still a lot of fun. So was that it for you?
What else have you been playing?
Yeah.
I've been playing, like, I'm back on Out of the Park Baseball for some reason, and playing lots of other small things. But one of these days, I'd like to find a way to do the historical mode in that baseball game. But for people who don't know, Out of the Park Baseball is a management game that is effectively a spreadsheet. So it's hard to make a video of that. But what have you been playing, Bob? What else have you been mucking around with?
Besides Back 4 Blood, I played through Arcane Studios' Deathloop. Which is currently a timed exclusive on PlayStation 5, but it should come to PC and Xbox sometime next fall. And this is a game that is developed by Arcane Studios, the makers of Dishonored and Prey. And it is a game in which you are playing as a security officer named Colt, who is stuck on an island in which you are in the midst of a time loop. And so it's kind of a bit like, as many commentators have pointed out, it's a bit like Groundhog Day meets Dishonored. You're on this island that features kind of a retro, early to mid 1970s aesthetic in terms of clothing, and then the look of buildings and kind of the character dialogue as well. And the music, fantastic music in this game. And the game, in terms of gameplay, first person action stealth, it plays just like a Dishonored game. And I think I ended up spending about 30 hours in this game, so a good chunk of time. I really enjoyed my time with it. I think a lot of people have promoted this as a Game of the Year candidate, and I would agree with that. But I think this game, for me, it goes just short of being an instant classic, because it feels a bit wonky in the same way that, or it feels a little bit, it doesn't work in the same way that Dishonored doesn't work, in the sense that I always feel like my character is kind of swimming through the levels, if that makes sense. And I don't feel like my actions and my movements are really precise in the way that I would want. And I feel like the developers have kind of gotten around that a little bit by making it easier in this game for you to react to coming out of stealth, right? And finding ways to overcome losing your losing your stealth or losing your ability to hide. But at the same time, the way that Arcane does first-person action, I just wish it was sharper. I wish it was a bit more cut and dry. But still, I love the story, love the gameplay, I love the multiplayer as well. You have a kind of a Dark Souls type multiplayer going on where you invade somebody else's game as an assassin named Juliana, and she is trying to stop Colt from breaking this time loop. And so you can run through and take down other players as they're trying to break this time loop, and it's quite a bit of fun, and I highly recommend it. If you enjoy Dishonored, you absolutely should play this game. But if you were maybe a little skeptical about Dishonored, maybe wait until this game goes on sale, because this is definitely just more Dishonored with a new setting.
Well, that sounds promising to me. It's interesting you talk about Arcane, I guess, is kind of invested at the moment, or I guess it's kind of the way they do action anyway. But mentioning Back 4 Blood versus Left 4 Dead, and it's such an engine and stuff, even if in Arcane they kind of get it that they'd be interested in tweaking the kind of that feel of that game, if that's something that requires a new engine or something like that, the tech debt becomes so intimidating.
Yeah,
as they call it, and you're looking at like, well, that adds 2 years to at that point we can't do it kind of thing. So I kind of, because I do know what you mean, but I don't think it bothers me as much as it bothers you. I like those Dishonored games, so I think Deathloop is something I'll maybe treat myself to in the new year kind of thing. I just couldn't see myself finding time to play it at the moment. But people love that game.
It's very good. It's very good.
Yeah.
Cool. And again, if you like any of Arcane Studios games, you absolutely must play it. It's easy to recommend in that regard. And then beyond Deathloop and Back 4 Blood, I've actually been doing some reading. Hard to believe, I know. But I read a couple of books recently. The first one is Jason Schreier's new book called Press Reset, Ruin and Recovery in the Video Game Industry. And this is a follow-up to his other video game development book called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. I'm not a big fan of the titles of his books, but I think the content is really good. And in Press Reset, he follows the story of the end of several game development studios, including those that made BioShock Infinite and Dead Space and what is it? Kurt Schilling's game, 38 Studios.
38 Studios, yeah.
Kingdom of Amalur, is that it? I think that
was it, yeah. That was it.
And so really interesting stories, kind of behind the scenes look about what happens when game studios fail and why they fail and why they fall apart, and then what happens to the people in those game studios, and discussions in particular. The book starts with a long chapter about Warren Spector, who is involved with development of Deus Ex back in the day, kind of a seminal first-person action game. And then he's also done all sorts of other games, System Shock 2, for instance, and but talks about his life and how he's gone through several different studio failures, areas where he's lost his job and hasn't been able to get a new one, and this is like a 30-year career. And Jason Schreier is just kind of pointing to the commonality within the long history of video games, going back to the 1980s, as to, why has this happened to the video game industry? Why is this, significant turnover over and over again, even sometimes with really successful games like BioShock Infinite? Good book, easy read, a couple hundred pages, but I think worthwhile, especially if you are interested in learning a bit more about how the game development business works from a kind of behind the scenes perspective. And then the other book I've been reading is Masters of Doom, And this is David Kushner's famous book about the development of id Software, and in particular the story of John Carmack and John Romero as they create Doom and other id properties during the 1990s. And John, this is a book. I think this book came out in. I'm gonna look up the date here, but I think it came out in early 2000s. Yeah, 2003. John, this is a book that I've owned in hardback for 15 years. I haven't read, and so I finally decided, you know what? I'm just going to get it on Kindle, and I'll probably read it if it's on my phone. But if it's an actual physical book, there's no way I'm going to sit down and look at this, not with my kids. And so I've been reading this book. I went to a wedding in New Jersey this past weekend, so I spent a lot of time on the plane reading this, and it's a fantastic book. It's incredibly well written. It avoids, I think, the mistake that I think a lot of nonfiction books like this make, where it makes up a lot of dialogue. This book doesn't include much dialogue at all, and the dialogue it does include feels like it's well sourced. And I've really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in, again, kind of a behind-the-scenes look at game development, or interested in the Doom series in particular. This is an easy book to recommend.
I read Masters of Doom probably around the time you bought it. I don't know why. I read it I read it in Austin, and I actually kind of want to read it again now because hearing you talk about it. I remember one of the things I agree it's a fantastic book. One of the things I remember really liking about it was that I really kind of came away with, I wouldn't say like a full understanding of the John Carmack, John Romero relationship, but like that's something that people talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
How those two got on, and Carmack kind of just stayed with id forever and moved on. And then Romero went on to do Romero things. But that book I thought kind of sketches out, well, this is who these guys are. You know, it's not quite as simple as the deathmatch inventing visionary and the tech guy, but also it kind of was that. And so it's kind of really interesting. I really like that about that book.
Well, in the depiction that the book gives of these two developers, in a lot of ways, is unvarnished, right? You see warts and all perspective on these two guys. And, you know, I think a lot of video game books, video game history books, get rightly criticized for being kind of celebrations of usually white North American developers. But this book doesn't really pull any punches, right? It takes a good long moment to criticize these guys when it's deserved. And so I think, you know, go into this book, you know, expecting not a hagiography, but instead a pretty good, I feel, realistic portrait of these two very famous and mostly celebrated developers.
Yeah, he didn't, you know, that book, and it was only 15 years ago, wasn't written for a stereotypical gaming audience, whatever that was at that time. And Schreier now, I think, benefits from a different kind of an audience interested in different things. I can't wait to read Press Reset. The whole thing fascinates me because people compare games to film all the time, which doesn't always work. But, you know, in the film industry, especially if you work crew, the idea that, oh, I'm set, you know, I'm working on the new Bond movie or whatever the case might be. I'm working on this new Marvel film. I have employment for 4 months, and I have to figure it out after that. And then and the idea that in the last few weeks of production, the last couple weeks of production, you're putting feelers out, or someone is hooking you up with, hey, I've been signed on for this new you know, the next Rocky movie or something. You want to come with? I heard they need a sound guy, or, you know, whatever the case might be. That this is how that kind of business has worked traditionally. But of course, they now have the benefit of scale, and they have that longer heritage where video games have grown up what feels like very quickly. And so I think that's kind of an interesting idea, because in some ways, video games seems to have inherited that idea. Like, our studio can support whatever 15 people ordinarily, but we can support 60 when we're full on production in the game. Now that the game is being released, 45 of you can go. Maybe we'll see you again next year when we ramp back up for the sequel or something. And I think Schreier, you know, to his credit, you know, that's driving him a lot in what he's currently working on. And he has an audience, I think, And I'm sure he's the same. I'm sure he also wants his book to read about people who don't know games from Adam. And he works for Bloomberg for crying out loud. But um, I think the audience is more sophisticated and is larger, even than in 2005, which is kind of a crazy thing to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say, with the film industry, a lot of those people behind the scenes, actors included, they're in unions, which is something that's completely lacking with the video game industry, to a large extent. So, maybe that is a reckoning that is coming. Hopefully, because reading the stories in Press Reset, it's really disheartening. It's kind of like, you have these moments, and as middle-aged men, John, I'm sure you've had similar moments where you kind of sit back and you say to yourself, wow, I kind of worked my way to this position. I wonder if I could have done something different, and like kind of one of my daydreams is like, well, what if I had gone into game development or, something like that? What it would have been like? And I read this stories in Press Reset and I'm like, oh boy, maybe I dodged a bullet there. I don't know. I mean, it's not like academia was all rose garden, but at the same time, the grass is not always greener, especially when it comes to making games.
Well, it's like Warren Spector is such a good example of that. I met Warren Spector once when he was working in Midway Austin, on one of his many, many stops. Here's a guy who has an astonishing CV, really, who can do the creative side, who can do the tech side, who can do it all. And he's not necessarily guaranteed a job. Now, maybe if you go up within Blizzard, for example, theoretically, you're guaranteed a job, but it's hard. What does a 65-year-old, to go into the future, Warren Spector's nowhere near that age, what does it look like for Spector at that point? And then the flip side, then, the industry has all these problems. We talked about Ubisoft already in this podcast.
And Activision Blizzard.
Activision Blizzard, because there's this question of like, obviously how are we thinking about gender in these workplaces, but how are we thinking about age in these workplaces, seniority, power dynamics, and everything else? And video games I think it's demonstrable now. They have no idea what they're doing as an industry. And I see today, at least the day that we recorded this podcast, I want to get his name right because I'll mess it up. He founded the Undead Labs, the guys who did the State of Decay games. Jeff Strain is his name. He's founded a new studio called Possibility Space, and they're embracing what's called forgive me now, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's a distributed structure, I think is what they call it. But basically the idea is that like, we'll hire you, you can live wherever you want. We're based in New Orleans, but you don't have to live in New Orleans to work with us. I myself think that being in person is an important part of things like that. But setting it up that way, which is like our policy is you can work from wherever, puts the employer in a position where they need to incentivize you to move to the place and be part of the in-person thing. And that changes it, and that changes the dynamic in a very meaningful way, I think. And so that kind of interests me as well, because maybe that's something for someone like Warren Spector to be a vanguard of that, right? To be like, to kind of, listen, for not to say Activision Blizzard is doomed, but there's only so much a company that size is realistically going to do or want to do in the next 20 years. Whereas companies founded in the next 5 years could be the ones that set all those various trends,
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting. Yeah.
And I think one of the criticisms I have of Schreier's book, A Press Reset, is that most of the people he's interviewed in this book are white men. And so there's kind of a great question that you have at the end, which he alludes to himself. And the conclusion is, what is the perspective of people of color or, women or different gender identities in this industry. And, if it's this bad for the quote unquote dominant group within games, then it must be even worse for those other, poorly represented groups. And so, yeah, it's a tough read in many cases, because you're looking at it and it's like, gosh, somebody like Warren Spector is so successful, and yet he's still struggling to get games made into his 40s. And, he talks in his interview portion of the book, he talks about like, I basically had to give up on having kids, in order to make this work. Right. It's like, wow, that's just, you know, and it's interesting to me, as an old person now, it's interesting to me of how little we've heard of these stories until the last few years. And I think it's been a large extent thanks to people like Jason Schreier, thanks to other reporting, that we've begun to pull the curtain behind the process of making games, and just how often debilitating and frustrating and dangerous, especially for women, that process has been over the course of our lifetimes. And it's an industry, obviously we still love games, we're still doing the show, but it's something that desperately needs change. It's funny, I think about this all the time with relation to the Gilded Age. I teach a U.S. history survey, and it's like, you kind of almost feel, looking at the game industry, that it's in a Gilded Age moment here, where there's just outright corruption all around you, and it really needs a set of institutionalized reforms, and not just within the industry itself, but also probably from the government, as well as what we're seeing now with Activision Blizzard is government involvement in this lawsuits. And but yeah, it's just weird to me to think as though we're living through one of these historical moments in which there will be some major rectification with the game industry going forward.
And it's fascinating because there's an interesting broader historical context in this, in the way that programming became this like thing for white dudes in the early 80s, late 70s. And there's a lot of good books out there that talk about this dynamic, that was not a preordained thing. Mm-hmm. That the history of computer science is littered with really important women. Like, it's not just Ada Lovelace. There's a lot of women involved in the history of programming, and so it's kind of it's kind of interesting. I look at it at Possibility Space, the studio founded today, and it's also something. I guess you could look at it and say they've consciously chosen to make sure there's different kinds of people in their leadership team. Then you look at some of the names. These are people who are like lead director in Watchdog Legion, people who have been out there in the game space talking about, like Austin Walker. Just they've been hired because they're good at what they do. Like, it's not, and it's I mean, not to make little of it, but it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah.
But then maybe the advantage the Possibility Space has is that kind of clean slate thing. Like, It can be one of my favorite anecdotes. Because Silicon Valley has a nightmare in terms of diversity hiring, and they kind of, at one point, they went from only hiring white men to hiring people of all backgrounds who went to Yale, right? And it turns out that one of the problems they were having was that, at least in some companies, was the staple thing they did in the interview was they had a whiteboard there, and they would give you a problem that you had to write an algorithm for, like on the whiteboard in front of everybody. And the thing is, if you went to Yale or Harvard, where all these guys went, that was just a thing you did in Yale and Harvard, like second year or something like that. Whereas if you went to UNC Chapel Hill, like also an extremely good university in North America, but that wasn't the pedagogy your instructors used, that's a really hard thing to do if you don't, and it's not necessarily something that's actually useful. Like, you don't do it in real life programming. Like, let's get a whiteboard and work this out on paper. Like, that's not how people actually work. And so video games has to have similar anecdotes of like, do this thing, so it's not designed as a discriminatory thing. You're just either subconsciously or carelessly assuming this person will do the thing you know how to do. And that's one of the problems you're into,
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that does it. We went way over for this episode.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. My fault.
Yeah, listeners, we didn't publish a podcast in September, but here we are in October, just, laying it down, almost a double episode. So I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and we'll be back with new episodes coming up. I can neither confirm or deny that I have an episode of the podcast coming out next week. I'm not allowed. I'm under embargo. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but we'll have more podcast episodes, new video episodes as well, including a new episode of Civs 101 coming out by the end of the month. And so lots to look forward to. Yeah, so John, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks a million, Bob. It was a great time.
And you, dear listener, thank you very much for listening in. And please keep up with everything related to History Respawn by visiting our website, historyrespawn.com. And until next time, goodbye.